Hello and welcome to the Ourdadsstamps YouTube channel, where we talk about all things related to stamps and stamp collecting. My name's Pete West and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates of new content. Hello again and welcome to another video from Ourdadsstamps. Today we are lucky enough to be joined by Sheila.
Hi Pete, and what are we talking about today?
So for today's video I thought I'd talk about postage due stamps, because postage due stamps often get forgotten about and get pushed to one side. And it's one of those things, I'm sure lots of collectors out there like me, once you get a postage due stamp, you don't really know what to do with it, so you stick it in the back of the book. And they're commonly or affectionately known as bob stamps, because that's where they go, the back of the book.
Right, so we've got a couple of tongue twisters here. We've got postage due stamps and bob stamps. Let's start with postage due stamps.
Okay, a postage due stamp is basically a method by which the post office can indicate that there's not enough postage on the letter. So occasionally people put letters in a post box or even get through the post office and they have insufficient postage on them. So they should be paying, for example, £1.25 for it to post to Australia, but they've only put 85 pence on. So somebody has to collect the extra 40p. And in general, actually, it's more than the amount that's due. Quite often, if there's 20p short, they will charge you 40p postage due because they're making you pay for the effort of actually collecting it.
So Pete, what exactly is a bob stamp?
Well, bob stamps, it's an affectionate term known for anything that doesn't really fit in the normal postage stamp catalogue. So things that are not necessarily used for putting on an envelope to post to your friend. Bob stands for back of the book, because that's where we all stick them. We don't know what to do with them, so we stick them in the back of the book.
So affectionately called bob stamps.
So affectionately called bob stamps, yeah.
Do you have a large collection of bob stamps?
I don't actually. Like a lot of people, I think it is just a space where you stick the stuff you don't really know what to do with. And up until I started my Maltese collection, there really wasn't much there at all. Now there's a big bob section in my Maltese collection, and it still is at the back of the book, you're right. But they include things like inland revenue stamps, which are...
They sound scary.
They are basically just receipts for paying revenue on, could be customs, it could be court fees, it could be taxes.
Stamps.
And in the old days,
the TV licence.
And the TV licence was a stamp as well.
Got given a stamp.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the old days, they issued stamps for receipt. And in Victorian England, sometimes those stamps could be used in the normal post. So there's those stamps. There's also official government departments that have their own stamps, like the Inland Revenue, like the Army, Government Parcels, Board of Education. They're all ordinary stamps which have overprinted with one of the government departments. And so they really don't fit under the normal description of a postage stamp, but they are still stamps and people still collect them. Unless you're a specialist collector, generally they go in the back of the book with the other bob stamps. And it's not just Britain that has these, that most countries have some sort of stamp that are not regular postage stamps, but they have their pride of place in the back. So postage due stamps were a method used by many countries to indicate to the postman, if you like, how much money he was to collect. And initially in the 1800s, this would have been in cash. I suspect really up until they stopped being used, it was always cash payment was the only thing that was acceptable. And obviously if you didn't have the money to pay for the postage due or didn't want to pay for it, then you didn't get the letter. And they either went back to the sender if they've put a return address, or they were put to one side.
That's an interesting thing. If people are writing letters these days, are they actually putting a return name address on the back? Do you think that still happens?
That's a very good question as well. When I send my stamps out, I always put a return address, and some things have been returned to me as well. But I don't expect many people would do that.
No, if you've got to handwrite your address on
yeah.
the back, because years ago that's what used to happen, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. So no, I do know in the post office there is a whole department that deals with undelivered mail, and if it's undelivered for whatever reason, whether the address is wrong, whether the address is not complete, whether the person doesn't live there anymore, and there is a department that deals with it, but I don't know what they do with them eventually. So that would be an interesting thing to find out.
That'd be a good job to research, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd probably try and do as much as you can without opening the letter, but if there's no return, you'd have to open the letter and
presumably you would, yeah.
Yeah, how interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so postage due stamps, as I said, they're generally uninspiring because all they are is a label for the postman to tell him how much to collect. So generally, they're just a little bit of a frame with a value inside it and nothing else. And that's one of the reasons why many of us collectors just stick them in the back of the book, because they're not particularly pretty. They're different from all other stamps. But as we shall see in a minute, there is actually more to it than that. So let's have a look at some.
I have a question. Now I understand in the UK the postage charge is by weight and size?
Yes. In a lot of countries it is, but yes, it is.
But back in the day, it was always just done by...
It was always done by weight, yes.
Not size as well.
No.
So done by weight.
The original penny post was half ounce, which was generally enough to cover an ordinary letter. However, if you were posting a letter that was, I don't know, the size of a wall, and it only weighed half an ounce, would the post office charge you a penny for it in the old days? I do not know.
Well, this is what I'm thinking, because back in the day, we always used to go to the post office and you'd buy 10 first-class stamps and 5 second-class stamps. Then they started coming in books. And I remember when we used to live in the Cape, just literally putting a stamp on a letter. You know, you would send an A4 sheet folded up in 3, you know, if you worked in a business, and stick the stamp on. Now it's all done by weight and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot more sophisticated, certainly with businesses. When you use their prepaid machines.
We used to have the old franking machine.
You did, yes. Yeah, that was always a tedious job on a Friday afternoon.
I used to quite like the franking machine. A few occasions I was let loose on it.
But now you print your own labels and you put in the weight, the dimensions of the envelope, and it works it out for you. So,
I mean, that's it. I think now you can print your own stuff off on your computer if you're...
And because of that, there are now no longer postage due stamps printed in the UK and several other countries because there is no reason for you not to pay enough. I suspect it still happens, but they've taken the decision not to print any more postage due stamps.
So if you put a letter in a post box with no postage on it and no return
address
on the back,
I don't know what would happen to it.
I think we should try it as an experiment. So if anybody out there
testing out
the post office, please feel free and let us know what happens.
Yes.
Oh, I have a plan. Write a letter to yourself and put your address on the back, but put it in a post box without a stamp. So in theory, they will return it to you and it's got your address on the front and on the back, and see if they notice.
Devious.
I think that'd be quite good fun. I bet somebody who's watching would give that a go.
We'll test out the Spanish Postal Service, see what happens. Right, France was the first country to issue official postage due stamps, and that was in 1859. Before then, the letter was generally just marked with, in most cases, a T standing for tax due, and the amount, and it was just written on by hand or maybe hand stamped, but that was it. So France decided to print some postage due stamps. And as I said earlier on, they were very basic. They were a simple frame and the amount due in the middle, and that's it. And soon afterwards, several other countries, or many other countries, followed suit. And they all did basically the same thing, just a very simple frame and an amount in the middle. And so postage due stamps has this sort of reputation for being boring, uninspiring, and being honest, In a lot of cases, they are. But as we shall see, there are some more interesting ones, and there are things to look for that make collecting postage due stamps maybe more interesting than you first thought. As I said, France was the first country to do it. This was soon followed by Sweden, the United States, and several other countries. But they all stuck to the same basic design of a frame with a number inside. However, there's a few countries that thought, even the Postal Administration thought it was a bit boring, and they decided to make them a bit more interesting. Peru was the first one, and they've got a picture of a ship and a llama on the same stamp. And then Portugal followed suit with quite an ornate painting put on stamps. And there's a place called St. Pierre-et-Miquelon. St. Pierre-et-Miquelon, many people don't know where it is. I had to look up, and it's actually off the coast of Canada. And it has its own postal service. And in 1892, they issued postage due stamps with a picture of a dog in the side. It's a Newfoundland dog, which is where the island is near. So there are a few, and I haven't got a full list of all the countries that issued postage due stamps with pictures on, but that's certainly something that would be interesting to collect and interesting to find out.
So did the UK not do one?
The UK did postage due stamps. In actual fact, the UK ones were quite an ornate design, but they were just a frame with the value inside. And I had a quick look through the Stanley Gibbons British Commonwealth catalogue, and I couldn't find any of the British Commonwealth countries that had anything other than the basic frame and value. The only one that varies from that slightly, and in my view is the best looking one out of Commonwealth stamps, is the Maltese one. But I may be slightly biased there because I have a huge Maltese collection. And in actual fact, the first time I got interested in postage due stamps was because of my Malta collection. As I've said several times before, I decided to specialise in Maltese stamps. And it got to the stage where I had every stamp from King George VI onwards issued by Malta. But when I looked closely, I realised I didn't actually have the postage due stamps. So I started looking to collect them. And there are quite a few variations of the same basic looking stamp. So although they look boring, you can quite often, more often than not, come up with variations. I then have looked at values of stamps, and so I was surprised to find, and this is the most valuable one that I could find, but there's an Australian postage due stamp that's catalogued at £45,000.
Have you got one of those?
Unfortunately not, no. No. This was a stamp issued in 1909. There were two different perforation types in this stamp, which I want to explain because it is quite a complicated thing. And there is the same thing in Malta, which is what drew me attention to this. There's the same stamp printed with what's called line perforation and another one issued with what's called cone perforation. And the difference is £27 for the cone perforation and £45,000 for the line perforation. So it's quite useful to know the difference. And what it is, originally, when they came up with a perforation machine, they perforated a complete line of one side of a stamp, then moved the sheet across and printed the next line, and then moved the sheet across until they'd gone through all the stamps in that sheet. Then they turned the sheet round sideways and did exactly the same thing for the top and the bottom of each stamp. And so eventually all four sides of the stamp were perforated. The trouble with this type of perforation is in the corners, sometimes the holes didn't line up, and you'd have like three holes overlapping each other, which caused a bit of a mess. So they came up with a perforation machine, the cone perforation machine, which does, as an example, it's in the shape of a comb. So it does one side of the stamp and the top and bottom of the stamp at the same time. And then it moves across and does the other side of the stamp and the top and bottom of the next stamp. And so that way, you know, all the corners line up exactly and it's much neater. There is a Maltese postage due stamp that has the same difference. It's exactly the same stamp. One is perforated one way, one is perforated the other way. And you can see on the image I've just shown, because I've got a block of 4, it's very simple to see in the middle that the dots are all over the place on the line perforated, but on the cone perforated, they're nice and neat. So if you come across something that says cone perforation, line perforation, that's what you need to look for. And obviously it's much easier to see if you've got a block of them, but it is possible to tell even with a single stamp which is which. And so yes, this Australian set, if you've got the cone perforation, then they're okay, but they're not hugely valued. But if you've got the one with a line perforation and it's a 6p stamp, mint, it's worth £45,000. So I wouldn't mind one of those if we come across it.
Yeah, so if you have got one in your collection, please let us know.
Now, the one thing about mint postage due stamps is really they shouldn't be out there. There's no reason for anybody to have a mint postage due stamp because they're only stuck onto letters by the post office for the benefit of the postman. However, lots of post offices realised that they could make money out of stamp collectors, and so they decided to sell them across the counter to people who wanted them. And this is another problem with postage due, is there are a lot of countries that sold huge numbers of these over the counter. And in fact, they're more common mint because stamp collectors have bought them than they are used. However, as we've just seen on the really early stamps, then it's possible to get ones that are worth a lot of money. And I did have a quick look through. It seems particularly with Australia, but certainly other countries, some of the postage due stamps could be £500, £600, £700 each. So whilst the argument might be I don't bother with postage due stamps because they're not worth a lot, then that would argue against that, really. Okay, well, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that little journey into postage due stamps, and maybe it's changed your mind about what to do with them, and you can put them in pride of place at the front of your album instead of at the back of them. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Bye. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.